Hi and welcome to my studio. My name is Jeanine Scheffert and I'm going to show you some oil paintings, some hand-pulled and hand-painted lino prints, and some paper earrings. I am usually set up out at Seed Savers Exchange, which is just north of Decorah. So this is kind of a unique opportunity to see my actual workspace, although it also has been transformed a bit so I can work from home. So first I'm going to show you this oil painting that I've been working on. Most of my paintings are inspired by my garden, and this one is a Seashell Cosmos. I am doing a pretty vibrant underpainting. When I get finished with this, the colors will actually be a little bit more realistic. But yeah, a lot of my paintings are influenced by my garden. A lot of my other work is also influenced by my garden. Although in the past couple of years, I have also started to be influenced by a couple of my friendly feline friends. This is a drawing of my cat playing around, so you'll see some sweet kitties in some of my work now in the past couple of years too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my painting process. It depends on the painting. Sometimes I will be in the studio like this. I took some photos of Seashell Cosmos from my garden, had a few different photos, moved them around, did some drawings, changed some things. There's definitely some creative license that I'm taking here. But I'll first sketch it out and then move things around that I don't like. And then for this one, I'm really pretty directly just painting onto the canvas. And so I, mix things up a little bit on the palette and then just paint directly on here. And like I said, I'm doing a bit of an underpainting for this one just to see how that works, but I do some of the blending and making some of that shape come out even at this point. Now, I sometimes do, as I'm describing, and make things pretty literal. Other times, I have another one I can show you that I did that's pretty basic. This is another plant, and it looks a lot like the plant, but it also is a little bit more abstract, and so you can still tell that it's a plant, but you wouldn't necessarily know exactly what it was. And this one I didn't as closely look at a photograph or an exact image, but thought about the plant and created it this way, and that was kind of fun to do that too. I sometimes work here in my studio, and sometimes I actually am directly out in nature taking that all in and working on an easel. Plein air is what that's called. So let me show you one I did like that. So this is one I did out in the prairie out by my parents' place, which is just south of town. You might actually have seen it before because my dad has been on the studio tour as a potter. Rick Scheffert. So this is out their prairie, and I just set up my easel there and went there every day for a couple of weeks and created this one right there in the prairie. This one also is not done by brush. This is a palette knife painting, and I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's a lot more texture here compared to the other one. So with this other one, it's very smooth, and I use the brush to smooth out the painting in that case. So this one, I use tools more like this. These are all palette knives, and for this I would get the paint on the knife and just kind of dab it. And you can scrape and you can dab, but it's a much different result than using a brush. And this has been a really fun process as well, to actually be out in the prairie dabbing away at this canvas. So I really enjoy the creative process and trying out new techniques and doing things differently with different paintings. So one of the things that I learned when I first did a studio tour was people would come through and see me painting and ask questions about it and get engaged with the painting, but they also would really get engaged with my palette. In fact, I had multiple people start asking me if they could purchase my palette, and I had never thought about that, but the palette itself ends up being a pretty unique and beautiful piece of artwork too. So when people started asking that, I actually started creating these palette artworks. So for example, this was a palette for another painting that I did, but I actually used these little pieces of canvas as my actual palette, and then also ended up finishing them a little bit to be small works of art themselves. So here are the palette paintings that I have right now. As you can see, some of them have literally been used as a palette, and then I kind of smooth things out at the end, and this one was like that too. And then I also started to just play around with it a little bit more too. I would add some media to play with the effects, and they look a little bit less like a palette, even though they started that way. These have been really fun to play with and end up having the same colors, of course, as the painting that they are being used to create, but in the end are their own little works of art as well. So I also have greeting cards. This can be a nice kind of introductory level to getting some of my art, and it also can be a way for the art to kind of live on after I've sold the originals. So the ones that I have here include a couple from oil paintings that I've done. This is poppies, this is a viola. A few from some lino prints that I'll actually show you here in a minute, but these here are all lino prints. And all of those I get actually, the cards themselves are printed by a local printer here in Decorah. And this last one actually is a hand-pulled lino print that I did myself here in my studio. So I'm going to talk a little bit about lino prints. And I'll explain the process of lino printing here in a minute. But first I'm just going to show you this example. This is one of actually my best-selling lino prints for the past couple of years. It's called Very Carefully, and it has a couple of porcupines, one porcupine giving a valentine to another. In the corner, you can see this one says AP. That means it's an artist proof. When you do a lino print, the process actually there's a series, and everything in the series is pretty much the same. Here is the actual print. Here we see 150. So this means that there's 150 of these prints that look just like this. This is the 106th one. So this is kind of what I ended up with. But as I was creating it, I went through a few iterations trying to decide how much of this background I wanted to keep. So if you see the actual series, there's no background left, but I did keep a few of these artist proofs and have a few of those for sale still that still have that background. So I'm going to show you a few other things that I'm in the middle of getting matted here. As I said before, my kittens have been muses for me in the past couple of years, so I've got a couple of those I'm just going to show you because they're kind of cute here too. Here's one of my little kitten on her pillow, and I have here of an adult cat hanging out. So what is a lino print? I'm glad you asked. Let me show you. So a lino print, the word lino is short for linoleum. A lino print is a carving that you make out of linoleum. So this is a linoleum block. It is artist grade linoleum. It's specifically made for this process. And generally what I do is I will draw what I want to see. So maybe I do, just a basic flower. I'll draw that on here, and then I carve away what I don't want printed. So you're carving away the negative space. And I use these cutting tools. They're kind of fun. They have actually a little piece back here where you can keep different sizes and shapes in the tool and use whatever is most appropriate for what you're cutting. So I'm just cutting away anything that is negative space. I'm assuming here that I want to keep the things that I drew in marker and not keep the things that are still the color of the linoleum. This, in fact, is a tool that I use for that. This you can kind of go a little bit harder and not worry about cutting yourself because you end up, hitting this. So that's what this is. It's just a safer way to cut. And I've done a lot of teaching of lino carving, and one of the rules is you always keep your hand behind the cutting edge, and this board helps you do that. So sometimes the negative space is inside the image. In this case, I'm cutting away the inside of this stem. I cut away the inside of this petal, and what I really want is just this outline. Other times I might keep some of that. It really just depends on what you want to see in your final outcome. But anything that you cut away is going to be negative space. Anything that you don't cut away that's where you're going to see the ink that you put on the plate. So I'm just going to ink this plate. This is a Lino black ink. Now what I'm showing you here is, of course, just one way to do this. This is something that you can do on many different levels. In fact, I've worked with kids a lot where you can use some softer linoleum. You can, essentially this is printmaking, a really basic printmaking process. You can do it with like an eraser or even a potato and any kind of ink you want to. This is specifically a black printing ink. And what I'm doing now is making sure that it covers this roller, because that's how I'm going to get the ink on the plate that I carved. There's a point that's called orange peel. That's the reference to what it looks like here. It kind of has that same orange peel look. You want to get it actually a little past that so that it's really smooth looking, so that it's going to give a smooth, even coating. Now here I'm going over to this block. This is a block. You didn't see me carving this one. This is one I already carved. This again is my cat muse telling us Happy New Year. And you'll notice actually anything that you're printing is going to come out backwards, and you'll see why. But you have to keep that in mind as you're creating it. If you have any words, you have to write them backwards as well. So I just make sure this is really covered evenly with ink. And then I'm going to put a piece of paper. Now once, this is what I call a proof. I'm just using inexpensive printer paper here. Once I get the process down and or the image how I want it to be, I would use an actual printmaking paper. And that can vary from different things. One of my favorite printmaking papers is like a rice paper or a mulberry paper. But if you're trying it, you can experiment with lots of different kinds of paper. This really is just a transfer process. And so you're pressing down on the paper so that the ink will come onto the paper. You want to make sure that's really even. Now, depending on the kind of paper and the carving, something like this is really smooth. I also use this like repurposed lotion container I have from many years ago. If you need it to be a little bit harder and like really get in there, you can use something like that. You do a little test to see. It looks like it's not quite as inked as I want it, so I'm just going to give it a little bit more around the edges there, and then we'll pull this print. Okay, so we're just going to peek, and it looks like now it is taking the ink, and it just took a little bit more of this harder one to go and transfer fully, and there she is. So once I'm happy with the final print, I actually get a printmaking paper and do that process again. As I showed earlier with the porcupine image, I'll do a series. Each of those series, or each piece in those series is about the same. So that's the basic printmaking process that I use. I'm going to show you a couple of bigger pieces that I've done here, and you'll see the block that I carved and then the piece that it creates, just to see those two side by side. And these are a little bit more intricate than the example that I just used. So this one is Pukeko. This is one I actually did when I was in New Zealand. Pukeko is a really interesting bird there that I kind of fell in love with. So you'll notice again that this is the mirror image. This is where I carved. Everything that isn't black is what's still raised up, and everything that has that brown color, that's where I carved it. I inked it, did that whole process I just showed, and then here is the print that it created. This one again is called Pukeko. I have one more I'm just going to show you for fun here. This one, I had a lot of fun with line in this one, and just kind of really playing around with using the line as the conversation that this piece is creating. So what I just showed you was a really basic printmaking process. It's basically just black and white. This is one of my favorites and best-selling plain old black and white prints of a chickadee, and this one is on a mulberry paper like I talked about. But I also like to do some color, and there are a couple of different ways I do that. One of them is illustrated here. This one I'm calling Bird on Twig, and this one actually has 3 different plates. And so I did that same process that I described first with the clouds in the background, and I used a blue ink for that, and I printed that. And once that dried, if you can see, there's a kind of a greenish leaf that I printed over top of that, and then did the black ink the same way that I just showed on top of that. So this one is a way to do color, but still using that same process of 3 separate plates. Dry the ink and then print one on top of another. So this one I did actually in a softer linoleum than what I just showed you. This was a pretty quick, simple design here. This again is the same Seashell Cosmos as you saw in my oil painting. I kind of went with that theme for a little while. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed doing lately is basically kind of creating myself a coloring book. So I create the outline the same way that I just showed, and then I use these watercolors to paint things, to paint in the color. And so in that way, these all use this same block. They have the same black background or outline, I should say, but I can go in and play with the color and create many unique but similar pieces. So this is an example of one way that I like to add color. I really find that fun. Here's another example, these violas. I didn't vary as much, but you can still see that each one is very unique. You'd see different watermarks and different things on each one of those. So I'm just going to show you a couple of prints alongside the final product. In this case, I'm actually showing a card of the final product because these all sold out. But these are the prints, or I'm sorry, the plates that I started and carved. Like we talked about before, any words have to be backwards, and everything is actually flipped. In this case, I painted the background, and that process I described of printing with this, and then painted that in for the sprout, and then printed these words on top. So this one is a Monarch and Zinnians. I actually only have 2 left of this print. I have this one and this kind of pinks and purples, and this framed one here with some oranges and reds. And again, that same process of using this as the block and then using watercolor to paint in the details of the colors. Now this one, I actually started off with more zinnias than that, and ended up deciding I didn't want all of that and took it away. But I have a couple, or I think I have just one left that I did with 1 extra zinnia, so you can see the difference in that composition. I liked this as an option as well. But then I ended up carving that away, so I couldn't possibly make another one of those even if I wanted to. A couple more with that same process. Here are some bluebells. And here are some zinnias. I got really into zinnias. I love zinnias. I have 3 of these bigger ones left. So I'm just going to show you this one last print. This is that same process of printmaking that I showed you. The black is that ink that I put on the plate, and then I went in with watercolor and painted the reds. When you do that, you do have to use a thick absorbent paper because you're using it as watercolor paper, so that does make a difference. And again, it's really fun. I feel like kind of a kid in a coloring book. I can make different variations of color with each different cardinal here. So the last thing I'm going to show you is the paper earrings that I make. Now this is something that I started doing actually when I was traveling. I couldn't take a giant easel and paintbrushes and canvas along with me, but I still wanted to create some things, and so I started doing these paper earrings. So for these, I really just draw the design on a drawing paper. Sometimes I even use like scrap paper that I might trim the ends off of another drawing that I did, and just make a really simple design with colored pencil. that's the gist of it. And then I cover that, or I cut it out, and I actually glue it to recycled cardboard. Sometimes I color the back of it, sometimes I leave it as is, but then I put a protective coating over the top, punch a hole in it, and then you have a paper earring. They're all very lightweight and colorful. Take them off before you get in the shower, but otherwise they should be just fine. And here they are. So a lot of people, when they first see these, actually think they're ceramic because of the way they look, but once you pick them up you realize they're really lightweight because they are made out of paper just with a cardboard backing. So they're also really fun for people who are sensitive, have sensitive ears, or don't like heavy earrings. They're nice and lightweight and obviously very vibrant and colorful. So like pretty much everything in my life, the earrings also come back to the garden. As you can see, I've made some carrot earrings. They've been really fun and sell very quickly. And I have also made some of these lima bean pod earrings. So these are actual lima bean pods. When they dry up on the vine, they kind of curl up and really create these fun earrings. That's actually what I'm wearing right now too. Thank you so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure to show you some of my work. I hope we get to see you in person in the future, but meanwhile I hope to hear from you this year. Thanks again.